As the Venerable Migituate Gunananda Thera finished his final discourse, the crowd was boiling. Shouts of "Sadhu, Sadhu," meaning saint, echoed throughout the audience, with such vigor that the handful of police present failed to re-establish silence until Gunananda himself signaled them to be quiet. For many of the inhabitants of Ceylon, who had come from all districts and villages around the island to watch, this was it. Their religion, Buddhism, had finally defeated, in a fair and unequivocal debate, that of the foreigners, Christianity.
It is generally believed that the British Crown colony of Ceylon, at some prehistoric...
Toward the middle of the 19th century, Sri Lanka was under colonial rule of the British Empire as the Isle of Ceylon, and torn between two distinct religious parties. Buddhism had been the faith of the Sinhalese, the dominant ethnicity in Ceylon, for more than a millennium. The British acquired administrative control over the island in 1815 through the signing of the Kandyan Convention. In this convention, local Buddhism was stated as inviolable, and its rites, ministers, and places of worship were to be protected. This neutrality, however, did not last long. In the decades afterwards, British authorities eventually turned their support toward Christian missionaries coming from Britain and America, who were eager to let their religion supersede what was considered as demonic paganism. Missionary schools were set up by the hundreds, and pamphlets and books were printed and circulated. This contrasted greatly with the local Buddhist educational system, which was stagnating due to lack of governmental support, and as a result, a significant portion of the local population had converted to Christianity by the middle of the century, and it was even hoped that Buddhism would disappear from the island within a few decades. Of course, the Buddhist side eventually became alert of their situation. Many Buddhist intellectuals began responding to the Christian assertions over them through publication of various articles, stating that instead of Christianity, Buddhism was the more rational and scientific religion, while also noting the destruction of Buddhism in Ceylon would severely damage the local culture too. Eventually, as the exchange of articles between religions began and the tension between the groups escalated, it was agreed that debates would be held publicly in order to settle the ideological clashes. The debate of Panadura was not without premonition. In fact, it was the culmination of four other consecutive debates: the Badagama and Waragoda debates in 1865, the Udavita debate in 1866, and the Gampala debate in 1871. The first two were held in the form of exchange of writing, whilst the other two were held orally. In the latter two debates, a significant figure emerged as the orator for the Buddhist side, having rich knowledge of both Christian and Buddhist scriptures, alongside with a strong talent in public speech. This person was the Buddhist priest Migituate Gunananda. In June 12, 1873, Reverend David de Silva, a Christian convert, gave a speech at the Wesleyan Chapel of Panadura concerning the concept of the soul. This speech was responded to a week later by Gunananda, and it was consequently decided that a debate would be held to settle the argument. This time, though, unlike the previous ones, both sides were determined to make a conclusion. On the Buddhist side, along with local believers who had gathered, around 200 priests presented themselves at the debate, electing Migituate as the orator, whilst offering support for his speeches. Meanwhile, David de Silva was requested to present his arguments first, and was not alone either, as Christian priests of every denomination on the island flocked toward Panadura in support. Quickly, with both sides of the debate preparing their ideas and the press ready for a report, the debate has escalated from a personal exchange of ideas to a direct confrontation between the two religions themselves, and with the people from every corner of the island speculating, the outcome of this debate would likely decide the future of Ceylon itself. At 8 o'clock in the morning, David de Silva stepped forward to explain his thesis. Quoting frequently from multiple difficult Pali Buddhist scriptures, He stated that due to the Buddhist denial of the substantiality of the Atma, or the constant self, that Buddhists taught that man had no soul, and that the identical man received not the reward of his good or bad actions. Thus, he followed, Buddhism cannot teach its believers to avert from evil, as a man who believes his end to be similar to that of a dog or a frog would not care for any retribution, unlike Christianity, which deals with this problem through the belief of a consistent soul subject to heaven or to hell. Migituati Gunananda replied in a much more direct language that because the Atma was so abstruse, it did not follow that its existence was denied. And thus that thou the human self is not constant, that inconsistency does not mean that the man becomes a new being unaccountable for results of actions. Therefore, the thesis of punishment or reward is still applying as seen in karma. He then started his side's attack on Christianity by arguing that from inconsistencies in the Bible, that the Christian God and thus faith was fraudulent, while stating that the Christian missionaries had been intentionally deceiving others in their attempt to cover this up. De Silva's second speech then focused on the refuting of the 12-fold formula, that is, the Buddhist model on causation and effect. Gunananda then expanded the unanswered points concerning the deception of the missionaries and the falsity of the Bible, whilst explaining step by step the formula brought up by De Silva. At the following overnight break, the Christian party decided to change their speaker to Ephes Sirimane, a catechist who had a better skill in terms of delivering his arguments. Sirimane's following third speech was much more persuading, explaining in context the problem raised by Gunananda concerning the Bible, while launching a similar attack on Buddhist scriptures and the according actions of the Buddha himself. Glimpsing victory, Gunananda then made an overall summary of his victories the previous day, and then refuted the arguments from Sirimane, stating that a more desultory and unscholarlike speech he had never heard. De Silva then returned his third speech in an attempt to raise new points against Gunananda, but Gunananda, holding the pace of the speech at this point entirely, was able to give a refutation to all of the Christian points, and then declare his own victory as the crowd acclaimed. Despite the fierce clashes, it is still unclear which side had won this debate. Surely enough, since no judge was present, the public reception of Gunananda and the Buddhists as winners seems justifiable as a victory. A statue of Gunananda still stands today in front of the Panadura Wesleyan Church as a proof of that. However, in theoretical terms, both sides were unable to conclusively refute each other, and whilst De Silva was ultimately unable to deliver his thesis, the Buddhists too were unable to deal the blow to Christianity that they were expecting. What the Buddhists were able to achieve, though, was that they had finally secured their status in Ceylon, allowing them to recover their influence. Meanwhile, as the records of this debate were published and spread around the world, intellectuals from Europe and America such as H.S. Olcott and the Theosophists began both implementing Buddhist elements into their local culture and aiding the development of Buddhism itself. In the following decades, a wave of Buddhist revival occurred in the island. A Buddhist press and new Buddhist schools were established, and in 28 May 1885, Migituati Gunananda himself hoisted the Buddhist flag, which was designed by Olcott and is still in use widely across the world today. To the locals, this meant that in the aftermath of the Panadura debate, an identity, that of the Sinhalese Buddhist, was recognized as the dominant one, able to fight colonial influences even after the independence of Sri Lanka. As political violence involving Buddhism against other religions has recurred in modern Sri Lanka, it is still being argued whether this was a recognition helpful to the national unity of the island against colonial influence, or a harmful pretext in which Buddhism was first amalgamated with nationalist sentiments, eventually culminating into chauvinism and Islamophobia. What can be assured, though, is that this debate between religions still exerts its influence both on modern Sri Lankan geopolitics and popular culture around the world, and that its consequences have changed both worlds, the Buddhist one and the Christian one alike.